I was embarrassed for Shasheen. She wasn't able to say what she intended to say.
Marlon Brando, the legendary Godfather, captivated countless women with his charm. However, that was only the surface. Behind that dazzling glory lay a life full of darkness, haunting obsessions, and scandals that even Hollywood hesitated to mention. In 2004, when Brando drew his last painful breath, a handwritten list discovered beneath his hospital bed shook Hollywood to its core. It was a list of male lovers he had dated. This list revealed complex relationships intertwined with psychological tensions in Brando's life. He even turned another famous figure into a slave in a manipulative and toxic SM relationship. So, who were the names on this shocking list? And which among them drove the bad boy Marlon Brando so madly that he wanted to keep their ashes after his death? Brando was born into a broken family, a strict, violent, and abusive father, and a mother, talented actress Dorothy, who was so severely addicted to alcohol that she neglected her children to follow her lover. Brando's childhood had no laughter. It was filled only with alcohol, screaming, violence, and the shadows of addiction. An incident that stunned the press happened when Brando was just 4 years old. Ermi, an 18-year-old maid hired to take care of him, became the boy's first lover. No one could imagine a 4-year-old having such thoughts. The image of Ermi haunted Brando's mind for his entire life, to the point that he became fascinated with dark-skinned women, Asians, and Jewish women, because they all reminded him of Ermi. Brando was addicted to sex, but not in a normal way. He once admitted to loving and having relationships with 4 or 5 people at the same time. He knew he caused pain to others, but he couldn't resist himself. The fear of abandonment stemmed from his mother leaving, and the image of the maid, Ermi, deeply ingrained in Brando's subconscious. It became a persistent obsession, a desperate attempt to soothe the pain inside, to feel loved and no longer lonely. Brando's youth was a series of rebellions. He frequently skipped school, and when he was caught placing a homemade bomb in the teacher's lounge, he was expelled. His father, in anger, sent him to Shattuck Military Academy, hoping to discipline his son. However, for Brando, it was hell, as the school's strict discipline was completely opposed to his wild nature. He ran away multiple times, was caught twice, and was finally expelled. It was these harsh shocks of life that led Marlon to the stage. In New York, he met Stella Adler, the woman who transformed Brando into an icon. Within just a few years, Brando became a storm that shattered every acting standard. Then came Last Tango in Paris, a film banned in many countries due to its controversial sex scenes, even accused of real rape. The scene between Brando and actress Maria Schneider still shocks to this day, as those involved revealed they were not informed beforehand. Despite having a brilliant career with classics such as The Godfather, On the Waterfront, and Apocalypse Now, Brando once confessed, "I have never been happy." He publicly admitted to having 9 lovers, but in reality, the number was much higher. Not only women, but he also kept many secrets with men. "If I love men, so what?" Brando once said. "We are human beings, not labels." So who were the names on his list of lovers? You will be very surprised to learn that they were not strangers, but rather very familiar people, including even some Hollywood legends. Wally Cox. Childhood love and the shocking conversation with his ashes. Marlon Brando and Wally Cox first met each other as students in Evanston, Illinois. They both attended Libertyville High School during the 1930s. Wally Cox was small, quick-witted, and often wore a wry smile. Meanwhile, Brando was quiet and frequently skipped classes. While many others teased Brando, Cox recognized something truly special in his friend. For Brando, during those youthful years full of uncertainty and confusion, Cox was the one who listened, understood, and showed the greatest tolerance. Once, when Brando's father scolded him so harshly that he broke the door to his room, Cox was the only person who witnessed the moment Brando burst into tears. And when Cox felt isolated in a society that valued masculine appearances, it was Brando who encouraged him. "You're much smarter than them. I need you to survive." They grew up together, lived under one roof, and later left Illinois to pursue their dreams in New York in the 1940s. But the friendship between Marlon Brando and Wally Cox was never simply friendship. It was a bond that transcended the physical, a profound connection, blending admiration, protection, empathy, and emotional dependence. Brando once confessed, "If Wally were a woman, I would have married him, and we would have lived happily ever after." According to writer Beauregard Houston Montgomery, Brando admitted that Cox was the greatest love of his life. Although Brando had relationships with hundreds of people, he never touched Wally Cox. In a late-life interview, Brando made it clear, "Sex is overrated. The most beautiful intimacy I ever had was with Wally. We didn't need to touch each other." In 1973, Wally Cox suddenly died of a heart attack, leaving Marlon Brando devastated, weakened like a child. He did not cry in front of the cameras, nor attend the funeral, but the truly frightening thing began afterward. Brando kept Cox's ashes at home for over 30 years, carrying the urn everywhere, from film sets and hotels to his private villa, as if unwilling to take his eyes off it. Every night, he talked to the urn, as if speaking to a lover just fallen asleep, placing it next to Cox's favorite books. A close friend of Brando recalled, "No one was allowed to touch that urn. If anyone did, he would get angry. He said, 'He's still here, every day.'" Brando often murmured to himself, in a sorrowful voice, "Wally? Wally?" The name echoing like a curse, like a call from a distant world. Some nights, he stayed awake, staring at an old photo of Cox, his eyes filled with an indescribable sadness. It was rumored that sometimes Brando would call mutual friends just to ask, "Do you still remember Wally's voice?" Gradually, Wally Cox ceased to be an ordinary person and became a ghost haunting Brando until his final days. In the lonely mansion on Mulholland Drive, many neighbors said they often heard his hoarse laughter echoing in the dead of night, like the scream of a madman. "I lost the only person who understood me." And when Brando died in 2004, he was not buried alongside his ex-wife or family. Instead, according to his last wishes, their ashes were mixed together and scattered at Death Valley, the driest, most desolate, and isolated land in America. This was not normal for friends, but a symbol of a bond that surpassed time and even death. 2. James Dean, the Fool, madly in love with the Hollywood monster. James Dean was the first lover listed among Brando's romances. However, what astonished audiences was that their relationship resembled a cat and mouse play. Brando took on the dominant role, while Dean, with a rebellious exterior but a shattered inner self, became the easy prey, destined to be crushed. In the book James Dean, Tomorrow Never Comes, 2016, the author quotes Stanley Haggart, revealing that this relationship had a psychological S&M nature. Brando often made Dean stand outside the door, waiting in humiliation for hours while he was involved with other people. He even burned Dean's skin with cigarettes as a way to assert power, manipulating the young actor's emotions like a puppet in his hands. Haggart described it as Brando seemed to tease Jimmy purely for entertainment, like a game to pass the time. Despite the pain, Dean retained a strange allure, turning his suffering into something beautiful, much like his roles on screen. Simultaneously defiant and fragile. In real life, Dean lived discreetly, immersing himself in photography, playing with animals, loving classical music, and passionately studying philosophy. On some nights, trembling with intoxication, Dean would sit in the hallway outside Brando's apartment, knocking on the door with no answer. To Brando, Dean was the pitiable one, willing to endure any form of torment just to be near his idol. But it didn't end there. In the legendary interview, The Duke in His Domain, Truman Capote recorded Brando's cold attitude. Dean was never my friend. I hardly knew him. But he was obsessed with me. Everything I did, he copied. He was always trying to call me, leaving messages, but I never called back. According to Brando, Dean idolized him to the point of obsession, mimicking everything from his acting style and clothing to the smallest habits. Brando, who despised weakness, increasingly showed contempt for Dean's desperate clinging. He was just a kid, breaking his toys and crying when he got hurt, Brando bitterly remarked. However, the truth was that Brando needed Dean. He needed a mirror, reflecting a version of himself, immature and fragile, to both despise and silently compare with. Each time he saw Dean drunk, writhing from childhood wounds or heartbreak, Brando felt a discomfort inside. Why don't you dare swallow that pain like a man? In 1955, James Dean died suddenly in a tragic car accident involving a Porsche 550 Spider called Little Bastard. He passed away at just 24 years old, leaving behind only 3 films, but becoming the first actor in history to receive an Oscar nomination posthumously. Years later, when asked about Dean, Brando's voice softened. He was a fool, but sometimes I find myself thinking about him. And Brando? He continued living recklessly, destroying relationships, but perhaps never again found anyone who loved him blindly and passionately, like Dean did. When Brando died in 2004, rumors circulated that in his final room, there was still a photo of Dean taken in 1954, with a bright, radiant smile. It seemed Brando would never love anyone like that again. Yet fate led him into the sad eyes of another man, a melancholic figure with an angelic face. 3. Montgomery Clift. When Brando fell into the arms of a broken-winged angel. For Montgomery Clift, each role he played was like a shell that helped him escape reality and protect the deep wounds within his soul. Yet fate struck him like a powerful punch, hurling him into a trajectory completely opposite to himself. Marlon Brando. Their first meeting took place one night in September 1953 at the after-party behind the scenes of the film From Here to Eternity. According to numerous reporters present at the event, Brando spotted Clift as soon as he walked in, but deliberately ignored him. Holding hands with a blonde actress, he laughed and chatted loudly, yet his eyes kept sneaking glances toward the corner of the room where Clift was standing. Then Brando suddenly scoffed, pushed the girl aside, and strode straight toward Clift. He stood right in front of him, hands on hips, head slightly tilted as if examining a strange creature. "I've heard you act really well, but why do you look so sad?" Like a clown who just dropped his smile, Ishram's face was breathtakingly handsome, his physique sculpted like a statue, his eyes filled with defiance and a free-spirited aura that made both men and women flustered. But what truly terrified everyone was his way of living, a wild instinct unbound by any restrictions. Clift could not resist that whirlwind. He wanted to love quietly, a gentle, discreet affection, like a candle flickering in the dark. But Brando was different. He lived as if burning every moment, intensely and fiercely, never hiding behind a polite facade. Clift sought a peaceful embrace, while Brando was a sudden flame rushing into his room without warning. Brando dragged Clift into endless nights of parties, drunken binges, and a string of brief romances with all sorts of people. Clift only knew how to silently endure, sinking into depression and swallowing every bitter word when witnessing Brando embrace and kiss one person after another. Later, when they were older, Brando recounted that there were inevitable fights between them. Clift once asked him, "Marlon, do I mean anything to you?" Brando replied with a mocking smile, "Do you want a romantic answer or the truth?" Then Clift angrily stormed out of the room. Brando loved in his own reckless way. And Clift? He loved with fanaticism, silently enduring, swallowing tears each time Brando got caught in a new scandal. That is why their relationship lasted less than half a year. Brando reached his peak with On the Waterfront and then The Godfather. But at the height of his success began a prolonged decline. His fleeting, meaningless affairs made him distant and unpredictable. Brando frequently arrived late, forgot his lines, and shouted at co-stars. From being admired worldwide, he gradually became a shadow, hiding in darkness, obese to the point that the director of Apocalypse Now had to film in ways that concealed his weight. And Clift? He passed away early, but lived forever in Brando's memory. It was rumored that Brando once sat alone in a room, repeatedly watching the film A Place in the Sun, where Clift looked at his most beautiful and purest before being swept away by the storm named Marlon Brando. However, Brando's next romance was with another actor, a person full of heat, wildness, danger, and nothing to hide. 4. Richard Pryor. If cannabis and a bed exist, they will belong to each other. The 1970s marked both the peak and the abyss in the lives of Marlon Brando and Richard Pryor. After reaching the pinnacle of fame with The Godfather, Brando gradually fell into a personal crisis, accompanied by a series of prolonged lawsuits. Meanwhile, Pryor, the comedic genius, was going through his most chaotic phase, drowning in drugs, alcohol, and fleeting relationships. Quincy Jones, the legendary producer, once stunned many when asked about Brando's sex life. He could sleep with anything. Seriously, anything. A mailbox, James Baldwin, Richard Pryor, Marvin Gaye. Jennifer Lee Pryor, Richard's wife, later confirmed that Pryor and Brando had shared a passionate night together, and Pryor never hid it. Richard would probably laugh out loud if he knew this was being talked about. She shared. He didn't see it as a scandal or something to be ashamed of. He lived like a flame burning fiercely, even if only for a brief night. They still met at Hollywood parties, exchanged subtle nods, and occasionally shared a few playful jokes. Pryor continued to spiral into alcohol and drugs, while Brando used each role to escape himself, eventually becoming exhausted and withdrawing. Sometimes Pryor would call Brando in the middle of the night, saying a few nonsensical things, asking about new films, politics, or just to hear the faint breathing on the other end. Brando didn't say much, but he always answered. A close friend of Pryor once recounted, "Pryor told me that Brando was the only man who made him want to punch him in the face, and at the same time hold him tight without letting go." Brando passed away in 2004, and Pryor died in 2005. There were no diaries, no public confessions about their relationship. Everything remains mere speculation, scattered fragments in the memories of others. Both died in utter loneliness, despite being surrounded by millions of fans. Perhaps this was the destiny reserved for geniuses who never truly belonged to this world. They destroyed themselves, sought salvation in each other. But in the end, they were just two wanderers on a path with no way out. When the final stage light flickered out, only one remained, old and frail, in a cold room, haunted by ghosts and memories that relentlessly tormented. It was at that moment the legend began to melt away. Then, on another day, a completely different gaze appeared. This time from a man strong, reserved, and so perfectly flawless that he was unreachable. 5. Paul Newman. The quiet love between two completely opposite men. In the 1940s, two of Hollywood's brightest first met at the Actors Studio. Paul Newman, embodying the quintessential image of the golden boy in soap commercials, and Marlon Brando, who always appeared as if he had just stepped out from a backstage brawl. At first, they didn't communicate at all. Their differences were so vast that a distance grew between them. Brando once called Newman Goldie Boy because of his polished, neat, and courteous appearance. Meanwhile, Newman admitted that Brando made him feel uneasy. He described Brando as a storm and said he could almost smell the danger radiating from him. However, as with many relationships in showbiz, Sometimes the strongest attraction comes from stark contrasts. Brando led a wild and intense life, openly sharing his relationships with both men and women. He once candidly declared, "I have experimented with the same sex and felt no shame whatsoever." Newman, on the other hand, was completely different. He had a family, a wife, and was portrayed by the media as the ideal family man. Rumors circulated that one night at a small party in Manhattan, Brando and Newman disappeared from the crowd together. They only reappeared the next morning, Brando with a sleepy look on his face, and Newman wearing sunglasses, absolutely silent. No one dared to ask any questions. But from that moment on, they began to be seen together more often, at rehearsals, private lunches, and secret meetings known only to them. According to writer Darwin Porter, who interviewed Brando before his death, Brando frankly admitted about Newman. "He couldn't fool me. Paul Newman displayed the same affectionate gestures on set as we did. He was just as bisexual as I am. The only difference is that while I was often caught with my pants down, he kept everything hidden in the shadows." And in the following years, as Brando reached the peaks of fame with The Godfather, and Newman won an Oscar for The Color of Money, they almost lost contact. But the media never forgot the moment at the 1973 Oscar ceremony, when Newman walked past Brando backstage. A stage crew member recalled that Brando flew into a rage, threw a glass against the wall, and shouted, "He acts like nothing ever happened," as if nothing ever existed. The media was curious and dismissed it as a personal conflict. But in reality, Brando never forgave Newman for playing the good guy too convincingly. And Newman, perhaps until the end of his life, he wondered whether he should have ever dared to live like Brando. Newman haunted Brando with things that could never come true. The final years of Marlon Brando. From a money-making machine to leaving with a massive debt. He was once known as a money-making machine of Hollywood, a cinematic icon with deep, penetrating eyes, and powerful roles that made the whole world stand in awe. However, as he entered the final years of his life, Marlon Brando no longer lived in glory or under the thunderous applause. Instead, he faced loneliness, silence, and a debt totaling up to $10 million USD, a bitter wound marking the closing chapter of a legend. It's hard for anyone to imagine that the man who once shook Hollywood to its core had to rely on government assistance in his final days. After 3 marriages and countless extramarital relationships, Brando had at least 12 children, both biological and adopted. Yet he did not have a complete family in the true sense, but rather children bearing the Brando name, each following their own path, simultaneously representing both his legacy and his tragedy. Christian Brando, his eldest son, was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 1990 after shooting his sister's boyfriend, Cheyenne. The incident shocked the entire world, not only because of the severity of the crime, but also because it happened within a family once regarded as powerful and legendary. Cheyenne, the beautiful yet troubled daughter, struggled with mental illness, haunted by an unhappy childhood, and lost in the spotlight of fame she never wished for. By 1990, she ended her life at just 25 years old. These stories not only reflect the dark side of fame, but also reveal the deep cracks in Brando's heart, wounds that no Oscar statue could ever heal. As a boot, he was powerless. As a man, once surrounded by love, he could not keep his home peaceful. As old age approached, his once vibrant body was ravaged by diabetes, liver cancer, pulmonary fibrosis, and congestive heart failure. Brando withdrew into his own world, avoiding the stage lights, premieres, and the clamor of the entertainment scene. Yet, even hidden in the shadows, he could not escape the ghosts of the past. Fame, loss, pain, and wrong choices silently haunted him. On July 1st, 2004, Marlon Brando breathed his last at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, aged 80. There was no grand farewell or solemn memorial ceremony. His ashes were scattered in two places: Tahiti, where he once passionately loved, and Death Valley, where he found peace. One place symbolized the desire to live. The other was the final full stop. Both were deeply private, just like the man himself. Brando never wished to become a role model for anyone to worship. But through his own contradictory, rebellious yet genuine life, he changed the perception of masculinity, fame, and identity. He dared to live truthfully, even if that truth was full of hardships. He dared to love, even if that love went beyond all societal boundaries. There was no farewell tour, no final film, no grand speech. Marlon Brando left this world in the way he had lived, quietly and defiantly. His life story did not end with thunderous applause, but with a meaningful silence. And strangely enough, that was the most fitting way. Because Brando never followed any rules, not only in cinema, but also in love, and even in his goodbye. Throughout his life, which was intertwined with both men and women, Marlon Brando's list of lovers, from James Dean, Wally Cox, to Asian and African women, was it a bold declaration of sexual freedom, or simply an endless journey searching for a kind of love he never truly held? What do you think? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue following the stories behind the legends. Because sometimes it is those hidden scars that truly make who they are, not the moments of brilliance on the stage.